From the heart of Central Florida, you are listening to the most electrifying show in media, A Neighbor's Choice. I'm your host, your neighbor, David Gornoski. Glad to be with you once again here in Sunshine, Florida, where the problems we have, they're not that hard to solve. We've got to learn to roll up our sleeves and solve problems ourselves. We can't rely on tribalism, can't rely on groupthink, can't rely on that old sad song of partisanship to solve things. We have to get into the mix of things with what we call skin in the game. Skin in the game. And skin in the game could only happen when we stop using politics and our blame games that go along with that to get things done. Isn't that a novel concept? I think it's not so novel. Most of the things that you enjoy today were built by folks who weren't using politics so much as using skin in the game to solve problems, whether it's air conditioning, whether it's the combustion engine, whether it's penicillin. These things are done through creativity, through the pursuit of the truth in the natural world. And we, on this 21st century, have thought, you know what, we tried as much of that nice stuff as possible, and now the only thing we have left to do is divvy up power. And so it's a nihilistic fight for power to the end, unfortunately, for so much of people's imagination. It's a fight for whatever we can imagine to solve problems. We have to always find the answer in more coercion, more forced submission. I'm tired of living in a world that can't imagine anything beyond that. I'm tired of living in a world where we can not get past that knee-jerk appetite to divide and conquer. To say, okay, who are my constituent allies? I must create a coalition and then win a majority-takes-all contest by which we can then assert our will and punish our rivals. That doesn't sound like a civilized way of treating people. That doesn't sound like a kind way of treating our neighbors. How will that possibly turn out if we continue to rely on, well, wait till I go to the voting booth and vote for people to do things against my neighbors that I myself would not be allowed to do? That's where I'll get my solutions. If we keep relying on that myth, we'll continue to devolve into fighting, conflict, and the things that we enjoy today. Masked chaos. To mask or not to mask? That is the question many people ask. Why do we have to accept these false dichotomies? Why can't we say, yeah, wear a mask if you want to, show respect for those who are scared, but don't put the barrel of a gun against your neighbor to make them wear a mask. That's not going to result in anything you or your children want to live in. The kind of degradation of civilization that occurs when everybody's in a state of masked chaos. That we've gone that way before for thousands of years. What do you think Saturnalia Festival was? It was everybody wearing a mask. You lose your identity, and all bets are off about moral decorum and decency. And that would always culminate in a sacrifice. We don't want sacrificial violence to rev up in this time. We want to solve problems together. Together, we'll do it. But together doesn't mean together minus one. It means literally human beings endowed with personhood saying, you know what? I'm tired of politics. I've been taught that you're my enemy, but no longer will I leave that as the foundation. I will now enter into a foundation of mutual respect. One of the ways we're going to solve this malaise in our society, in our culture, is when we learn to get rid of forever wars. Today is Memorial Day. It's a day where we honor the fallen men and women. The day we honor those who sacrificed their lives for the preservation of the nation. So we take this time to remember them, remember the human beings who shed their blood. And to do that, we have a friend of the program, someone who fought and put skin in the game himself into foreign wars overseas. Danny Sjursen, how you doing?
Oh, I'm great, David. Thank you for having me.
Well, and great to have you again. You know, a lot of things have happened since we last talked, I think in D.C. or something, huh? It's been a lot of crazy stuff, right?
Just a little. It's difficult to keep up, isn't it?
Yeah, doesn't it feel like a lifetime ago when we were dealing with, just trying to end those quaint foreign wars? That was the only problem we had on our shoulders back then, Danny.
That seemed like a monumental task in and of itself. And as I'm sure we'll talk about, when it turned out that this, pandemic and everything that it's supposed to imply wasn't enough to even be a blip on the forever war radar screen, or so far, that raised a whole bunch of other questions, didn't it?
Right. Well, Trump tried to use the whole war thing. This is an enemy we have to fight. I don't think it really sold well, did it? It didn't. I mean, I guess in some circles there's a warlike attitude about this, but I think it's created more division than unity, this whole pandemic.
It does seem that way. It also appears to prove what I guess we already knew deep down, however disturbing it is, that any issue will be politicized, any issue. And that's become clear. War isn't the only thing, and whether the war is at home or abroad or in our bodies or over masks or you name it, it's going to be politicized, and somehow everything becomes establishment right versus establishment left, and for the most part, the rest of us are on the sidelines saying, what the heck is going on?
Right. And so, now we have this time where we used to have this constant talk that we need to end these forever wars, but yet we're not ending them. What's going on over there? I mean, we're going to talk a little bit about your experience overseas, but just from your perspective, you're a blogger, you're a writer, you're involved in a lot of different publications of different ideologies. How come we can never get past this constant call for ending wars, but no actual results?
Well, I think there are a few reasons for that. The simple answer is that forever war is systemic, and it's taken on an inertia of its own. And in some sense, that sounds like a cliche or a platitude, but it really is the actuality of our situation. War, forever war, so long as the casualties, this is Memorial Day, right? So as long as the casualties remain below a certain threshold, and so long as we have a volunteer force and not conscription, it's the most bipartisan enterprise, or one of the few remaining bipartisan enterprises in the duopoly that remain. And so because war, through the use of machines, militias, and mercenaries, the reliance on those things, particularly in the last decade, war has become nearly invisible. It's as invisible of an enemy as, Trump calls the coronavirus and everybody else does. And so it can continue to operate at a low enough intensity for us, right, for our casualties, not so much for the people being bombed. It can run at that low intensity, level indefinitely. And I would go so far as to argue, some people, of course, say that I'm a conspiracy theorist on this, but I would go so far as to argue that it is designed accordingly. And I think that there's evidence throughout a number of administrations since the Second World War that this is a design. This is forever war by design. And it no longer matters whether there's any actual, goal or output or even hope for victory. It will churn on to the benefit of a tiny few at the expense of, the vast majority of us, even if we don't necessarily feel it directly, because our sons and daughters may not be in the war and because our taxes haven't, been raised officially and directly because of this war.
So, having said that, what does Memorial Day mean to you?
Well, Memorial Day is tough for me and a lot of veterans, of course. I'm not a singular entity at all. I find it to be, like Veterans Day, a wretched day in a lot of ways. Not because I don't, honor the fallen. I feel like I shouldn't have to say that, although the volume of hate mail in my inbox this morning since my article published about Memorial Day indicates that, of course, apparently I have to. My son is, who's 12 feet from me right now, is named after the first 3 soldiers to die under my command in Iraq. I mean, everyone honors the dead and the fallen and their brothers however they choose. However, I am sick of the vapid sort of vacuousness of the holiday. I think that Memorial Day has been mythologized and nostalgized and read back into history to mean, the Normandy invasion and the Battle of the Bulge in World War II, without any sense of, that generation has just all but died off. And the holiday and its sentiment and its concept and its remaining utility hasn't really been questioned in the wake of modern war, where there is this just immense disparity between the amount of folks we kill and the relatively few American uniforms the key word, soldiers that die over there. Now, of course, that shouldn't be misread, as it has been a lot today by, some of my detractors, who I love, to think that, that means I want more Americans to die, or that I don't think we should honor, the handfuls that continue to die here and there. Rather, I think that the way of war, the American way of war, which is really a mercenary Memorial Day, a machines Memorial Day, a lack of empathy, a lack of any sort of vision or imagination as to what the purpose of all this is, means that Memorial Day really ought to be updated, challenged, and I think reframed to a certain extent, not because we shouldn't, honor the 7,000 odd soldiers who have died since 9/11, but so that we should ask what was it that they died for, and just how has our government, in our name, transformed war in such a way that it can continue indefinitely, and hopefully, it seems, do without even anything close to those, casualty rates that we saw at the height of the Iraq and Afghan wars when I was there. It's different now. And one would look at that and say, isn't it great? Isn't it great that a lot of Americans aren't dying anymore? And I would say, well, yes, on the surface, that is true. But there is something deeply nefarious and almost obscene about the way we've reframed and crafted war to make sure that it goes on forever. But it feels just as real, I can guarantee you, for a Yemeni under those bombs.
We're speaking with Danny Sjursen, reflecting on Memorial Day and the cost of human life and suffering. As we continue live on Our Neighbor's Choice, we're going to look into some of the things going on in foreign policy that we may be distracted about, given the situation we've been dealing with the pandemic. Don't go anywhere. Our Neighbor's Choice will continue in just a moment.
A lawsuit is a devastating process for families. It can be an emotional roller coaster ride. There is a law firm in Tampa Bay that practices with this in mind. That law firm is Catania & Catania. We know and handle personal injury law for families with care. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania & Catania will take care of the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims don't even realize they can claim compensation for their loss until they talk to us. Catania & Catania only represent private individuals. We treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's our way of practicing law. It's our commitment to you. Remember, we don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to CataniaCatania.com, award-winning, over 28 years, and family first. Catania & Catania, personal injury, auto accident, and motorcycle accident attorneys.
Let's face it, these are stressful times. New routines, the constant bombardment of bad news, and trying to keep you and your family safe all the time. It's Frank for Center for Men's Health. During these stressful times, your mood is so critical, and nothing's more important to a guy's mood than testosterone. The single greatest issue for guys with low T is mood, and the single greatest change for men that get low T care is a greatly improved mood. Many are grumpy when they start, and most can't believe how much their mood improves once they get treated. And everything improves once your mood improves. Feel the difference C4MH.com can make in your life. I've been a patient of C4MH.com for a couple of years, and recently I've lost 20 pounds because now I have the energy to work out from home. And that'll put you in a good mood too. C4MH.com's express treatment plan is convenient, affordable, and above all, safe. And with locations all up and down West Florida, there's one near you right now. Find out more. Go to C4MH.com.
If you know anything about NFL or about NCAA basketball or football or NHL or whatever, entertainment television, make sure you make a deposit at betdsi.com.
Promo code Bubba100.
Again, make a deposit. They've been getting a lot of great response from the Bubba Army. Make your deposit using promo code Bubba100. It's simple. Go to betdsi.com.
Promo code Bubba100.
Sign up with the Bubba100 code and make that deposit and get your bonus, plus have some fun at the safest wagering site available. Fast, on-time paying their winnings out, incredibly mobile-friendly. And if you haven't already signed up, then go now. Make your deposit at betdsi.com.
Promo code Bubba100.
Bubba100 gets you a special bonus and gets you in the game. Again, www.betdsi.com, and at the promo code portion,
Bubba100.
Bubba100. Thank you.
Welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice. This is David Gornoski, your host. Thank you for joining us. If you're listening to us in Radio Land on WHBO and News Talk Florida in Tampa Bay, make sure you save this signal. Join us every weekday for the best news analysis. We make news on this show because we bring people who are making stuff, doing things, skin in the game. So, and if you're joining us on News Radio WFLA Orlando, glad to have you as well. Once again, we've been with you guys for some time. And if you're joining on our podcast or live stream, make sure you share it with friends. We're talking about Memorial Day and what it means to us today. And we have a short segment here, but I wanted to ask Danny Sjursen, what are some of the different conflicts or foreign policy events taking place while we were busy with this pandemic we may not be aware of?
Well, there's a number. We've been bombing 7 countries on the regular, since the Obama years. But in a couple of those places, there's actually been an escalation on one level or another during the pandemic, right? I like to call it the pandemic opportunism, right? And so, first of all, there's been the threats and the sanctions tightening and all the nonsense with Iran. And there was even an order sent by Mark Esper, the Secretary of Defense, to the general in Iraq, telling him essentially to create a plan to up the proxy war. But that's not even the worst of it, because so far, at least, that's, been mostly talk. We've put a literal bounty on the head of the Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. I'm quite certain that we had some role, at the very least knowledge, of the mercenary coup attempt farce that went on in Venezuela in early May, earlier this month. And, of course, there's quasi-blockade of Venezuela, naval ships down there. This is old-school gunboat diplomacy. And then I just recently wrote about Somalia, a war that we've been involved in now for 18 years running. And, of course, before that, in other instances, most famous being the Black Hawk Down incident of 1993. But we've actually exponentially increased the bombing ever since Trump came to office, but more particularly this year. We're on a pace to, break the record of bombs dropped on Somalis. And, of course, the most interesting thing about that escalation to me is that AFRICOM, the command for U.S. troops in Africa, and the Pentagon didn't even feel obliged to provide an explanation for this escalation of bombing and killing, because I don't think they have one, and they also know that the American people are apathetic and distracted always, but especially now. And so they don't even owe us an explanation of, hey, what are we trying to accomplish? Is it possible to, defeat al-Shabaab, the purported al-Qaeda group in Somalia? and can we actually have any influence in a positive way in this, local conflict, even though we never have before, right? So I think those are just three examples of the escalation of these ongoing campaigns.
Yeah, and it seems like in each case, we're not actually motivated by any kind of coherent moral principle, are we?
Oh, morals, no. I mean, the ethics of empire are problematic in the first place, if not contradictory, and most certainly the United States performs as an empire on the daily. We have different habits of empire, depending on the temporal space, right, depending on the phase of our history, but we're an empire nonetheless. Not only does there not seem to be any real ethical backing to what we're doing, there does not appear to be anything close to a coherent strategy. I would be very interested to just, see Pompeo, the Secretary of State, or Esper, the Secretary of Defense, go on television and actually clarify for us in like a 1 hour, give them an hour, right? Give them a whole hour. Clarify for us what is it that we're trying to accomplish. Give us any sense of some, waypoints along the way and evidence that perhaps we're getting there. And I don't think they could really do it. And of course, they don't even really, again, feel obliged to try. And I just don't see it. I just don't see them able to do it because, frankly, the notion of victory is now laughable. Okay, I still talk to enormous numbers of people still on active duty, and of course, even more veterans. And no one even, I'm talking pro-war folks, a lot of them, they don't even talk about victory anymore. They laugh at the idea. They're sort of resigned to the fact that this is just a job. I support my country. I fight these wars. But no one talks about winning anymore because no one knows what the heck that means.
Yeah, that's something that's kind of passé. But yet what people are sold about in the heartland is the moral message. You sign up because of the moral might of what we're doing around the world. That's the main marketing pitch, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think what happens is that nostalgia in the form of American exceptionalism comes to the fore. So you see this in the Iraq War, for example. Once every single argument for going to that war kind of fell apart, Bush immediately pivoted, and we've done it ever since, to, well, it's about freedom. Isn't it better to get rid of Saddam? We're doing the bidding of the world, and this is the freedom agenda. So, of course, we rely on that when we run out of strategic ideas.
And yet, here we are, as you said, in more skirmishes around the world. We're fighting, I like the way you put that. Trump said we're fighting an invisible enemy with the virus, but in reality, we're fighting a lot of invisible wars around the world with our continual presence overseas, so much so that folks at home are barely aware of it. And what they are aware of, they seem rather apathetic or numbed out about caring. Well, let's try to investigate why we should care more. Here we are on Memorial Day, thinking about people who have died because of war. So we should take this time, at least today, if not every other day, but at least today, pause and think about the real cost of our foreign policy on human beings and their families. If not today, when will we stop and think? Have this holiday? Let's make it holy. Let's think about peace. We'll continue live on A Neighbor's Choice with Danny Sjursen as we unpack his experience as a veteran and understanding how war affects us all.
Special report, coronavirus update. A Memorial Day visit today for President Trump to what's considered the birthplace of the Star-Spangled Banner, Baltimore's Fort McHenry, and a tribute from the president to military service in a time of coronavirus.
Tens of thousands of service members and National Guardsmen are on the front lines of our war against this terrible virus, caring for patients, delivering critical supplies, and working night and day to safeguard our citizens.
The president on Twitter earlier threatened to relocate the Republican National Convention if North Carolina's Democratic governor doesn't guarantee a full capacity gathering in August. 2 days ago, North Carolina saw its biggest daily increase in virus cases. The World Health Organization suspending trials of a malaria drug President Trump said he was taking. Another large study tied more deaths and heart trouble to hydroxychloroquine. I'm Jan Johnson.
Every home has a to-do list. That leaky drain, bare spots on the lawn, repainting the trim. To finally get that to-do list done, call in a pro. Over the past 20 years, HomeAdvisor has connected over 100 million homeowners with trusted local pros. And during these times, we're making it easier than ever for great pros to join the HomeAdvisor network. For a limited time, home service businesses can get $200 in free advertising. Visit homeadvisor.com/start for details. That's homeadvisor.com/start.
Attention all authors. Page Publishing is looking for authors. Have you written a book and want to get it published? Page Publishing will get your book into bookstores and for sale online at Amazon, Apple iTunes, and other outlets. They handle all aspects of the publishing process for you. Printing, cover art, publicity, copyright, and editing. Call 800-501-3689 now for your free author submission kit. That's 800-501-3689 for your free author submission kit. Again, 800-501-3689.
We're soaring high across Central Florida together. On A Neighbor's Choice, we're live. Glad to be with you. Thank you for spending this time with us on Memorial Day as we reflect on the true cost of war and how we can honor those who have died in past wars. To do that is veteran Danny Sjursen. He's with me. He's a columnist. And Danny, where can people find your work? You're everywhere. I mean, you just got to Google your name. You're all over the place. But what's your entry point into your content?
Yeah, I would say the two best ways in. I do a Tuesday morning column at antiwar.com. That's every week. But if you go to my website, skepticalvet.com, that's the best way because I do write for a variety of publications and they all pop up there. So yeah, skepticalvet.com.
And how has the reaction been to your articles from the veterans who've engaged you overall?
Well, it's interesting. It has changed over the years. I wrote my book first, which I think is kind of the opposite way you're supposed to do it. My first book in 2015, and then I've been doing columns ever since with greater frequency. I've seen the responses change. The best way I could describe it is that in the beginning, when Obama was still president, the sense was very defensive among certain veterans, especially more sort of Republican Party leaning, I guess, mainstream or establishment Republicans. The idea being that, I was too, somehow pro Obama or something, which of course I wasn't. I always critiqued him, but I got a lot of pushback saying, being anti-war is sort of like being anti America, or most of my vitriol came from the veteran right. That has changed, and I think this is instructive upon the election of Trump, because folks think that I'm not hard enough on him because I also attack Biden and Obama, and I constantly talk about the systemic problem of forever war. So suddenly, on the occasions when I say, hey, Trump's not all wrong about what he says, even though he often doesn't follow through, as I know, I've actually started getting almost all of my hate, not just from veterans, but in general, from the mainstream sort of MSNBC, DNC-inflected left, which is fascinating. But, for example, overall, I have seen more veterans turn skeptical and critical of the wars and more active duty folks. And so I'm getting a higher percentage, I would say, 2-to-1 positive reactions from veterans than negative. And I would say that was probably inverted even 3 years ago. And also my former students, who of course I can't name because they're lieutenants out in the Army at West Point, my former cadet students, and folks that I still know on active duty, peers and others, they have been not really leaking to me, but sort of, messaging me, sometimes from the war, and basically saying, look, a lot of people feel the way you do and more than ever. And I think that there are rumblings of dissent within the force, even still serving members, because after 2 decades, look, these aren't stupid people. It doesn't matter how educated they are, what their degrees say, or if they're a private or a general. in some senses, I think the privates have a better earthy sense of what's going on than the generals in the Pentagon. But, folks aren't dumb. They can sense that this is forever, this is endless, and that they are not seeing victories, and no one's really painting for them a picture of what it is they're supposed to accomplish. And that, I think, is, we talked about ethics earlier, that's immoral, I think, to ask folks to fight a war when you don't really even as a policymaker, you don't think you can win. And that's not even the goal in any real sense. That's obscene.
And I think that's I wrote an article one time that was kind of along these lines called "The Flag as a Coffin Veil," because we use the flag and we imbue it with sacredness, but behind that flag oftentimes is the body of someone who was slain, and they didn't need to be killed. And I'm reminded of the Johnny Cash song, Man in Black, about I wear this for the thousands who have died, believing that the Lord was on their side. I wear this for the other thousands who have died, believing that we all were on their side. And I think he reveals something there which we need to think about, which is we say it's for God and country, but in reality it's just us that are pushing these people into wars they shouldn't be in and risking their lives. It's not some grandiose scheme of God. God doesn't demand sacrifice. It's the crowd. It's us. We all is the Lord, right? The Lord is what we say to our young. Oh yeah, you're doing the Lord's work. Go off and fight these wars. But really, the thousands who have died told that they're on God's side are actually, it's not God's side. God doesn't desire people to die and go off in wars they shouldn't be in. It's us. We're the ones that want it, but we project it off into the sky, or we project it off into the grandiose terms like democracy, right? Or the people's will or something.
Well, America has developed a sort of messianic civic religion of sorts. I agree. Everyone who's ever died in war thought they had God on their side, or were told they did. This is interesting and important what you're bringing up. I mentioned in my column at Mother Jones today, who I don't normally write for, but they published an op-ed, joint op-ed I wrote with State Department whistleblower and former Marine veteran Matt Ho, great activist and veteran. And, I said at one point, I said, some people are going to think it's impolite of us, to question the value and the ethics of Memorial Day, and that they're going to, think it's impolite for us to do that because of the sacrifices of, those flag-draped coffins. And what we said is we thought it would be obscene not to use that word again. And I still really do agree with what we wrote. And what I mean is, this is all done in our name. And I put like a capitalized O on that. We may not have a draft. We may not have a direct war tax, although we certainly have a war debt. We may not directly have this on the news constantly or really engage our citizenry at all. But we must not forget that the mob, you mentioned the people, right? The mob is God in a sense, in terms of this is done in our name. This is done because we haven't stopped it. Now, not that it's easy to do that, right, in our system, but we are all culpable in the deaths of civilians and foreigners, and the deaths of our own soldiers. And I really do think that it is an ethical crisis at the root. And I don't mean to be hyperbolic there. I think it's an ethical crisis at the root of our republic, or what's left of that small r, to wage forever wars and not really explain to the people or to the soldiers what exactly this is all for. No one even tries anymore. That's an Orwellian sort of moment, when you can just switch enemies, for example, the way they do in the book 1984, and the way we've done repeatedly. And of course I can give examples if you want. This is really a massive problem. This is rot. This is a disease that's as bad, and it's going to last a lot longer than the coronavirus. And it's a disease that's really infected the body politic and society. It's obscene, and it's really awful.
So, when you look back at all the different wars, and you're a student of history, is there a particular war that you like to study as an analyst the most, just for historical interest?
Well, I'm a hyper geek, and I'm a little bit manic as a reader ever since I was a little kid. I remember one summer when I was 7, I took every single book about Custer and the Little Bighorn out of the Staten Island branch of the local library, right? I mean, like 30 books, and read them all. I was a weird little kid. But so my point is, I run in and out of interest, like I'll go in phases. Recently, to be frank, I've really, and a lot of my articles have shown this, I've been really interested in imperial history, high age European imperial history, specifically in Africa. So I've really been studying from, the late 19th century up to the decolonization of the last Portuguese colony in 1975. And I've been looking at those wars, particularly in southern Africa surrounding apartheid. And I've really been particularly interested in some of the parallels to the way those failing empires, right, even if they didn't see it at the time, those flailing and declining empires of Europe, sort of the way they tried to hold on and some of the symptoms of the rot. And I think that there are scary parallels. All historical analogy has to be taken cautiously, right, because no two situations are exactly the same, and there are no, hard set lessons in history. However, there are aspects domestically as well as internationally as to what happens to these, falling empires that called themselves republics. We should remember they all did call themselves that, or democracies. There are things that happen when that empire comes home. There are diseases that I mentioned that sort of infect the society, and we've seen this before. We were often on the wrong side of history in those cases, sort of supporting those failing European empires, so long as they said they were anti-communist, or today it's anti-terrorist, right? You just pick your Orwellian enemy. And this is really something I've been particularly interested in. And then, for readers who are interested and want to follow my work, in the next month or two, and I've already started, I'm going to be diving into sort of the proxy wars in Central America and shifting my topic. And the reason for that partly is because I'm fascinated by what happened in Venezuela and truly believe that it's indicative of our history and very much of a piece with the American way of war. So there's a lot of subjects, and those are just two.
As a military historian, Danny Sjursen, what do you think of the argument that if we don't maintain our hegemony around the world, involved in Africa, involved in the Pacific, South China Sea, and all these different areas, if we're not over there, China or Russia or somebody will pick apart and control the globe, and they will spread their more, in the narrative, more totalitarian values. And so it's a gift to humanity that we must carry the burden, pick up our cross, as they would say in their frame, and do the burden of protecting the world from the rise of China and other nations if we leave.
It's a very important question and a very important argument that I constantly have. It's probably the number one question I have to answer from my detractors. This is the indispensable nation argument, right? Madeleine Albright used that phrase all the time to describe the United States. And it's of a piece, of course, with American exceptionalism in general and our sort of, messianic identity. Look, this is important to remember. Every single empire, every single one in history that I have studied, and we're talking dozens, has made that exact same argument against their domestic dissenters, right? Their domestic dissidents who said, why are we fighting all these foreign wars? You can go back to the Romans and before. They always made the same argument. If we don't, right? The Romans said that if we don't, then the Parthians, the Persian, or the previous to the Persian, or the barbarians in Germany, they're going to spread themselves. And, the British said the same thing about the Russians, right? Just like we do now, right? Whether, in the Great Game in Central Asia. And every empire has argued this, and we've argued it throughout our own history, right? The enemies have just changed. Look, I'm for empirical evidence and reason to the extent that it is possible to use. What we know, and I have proven this, as have dozens of other better scholars than me, that almost every single action the United States has taken, especially since 9/11, but even really much of it during the Cold War, has turned out to be counterproductive at the very least, right? Created more enemies, created more local conflict, more death, or in many cases actually had direct blowback on the United States, like backfire. More than just counterproductive, the situation on the ground being worse, actual blowback. Afghanistan's most famous example, of course, with our support for Osama bin Laden. And everyone knows that story, but here's what you don't see a lot. And I used to show this slide, and then I'll sort of end this part with that. But I used to show a slide in class, and I do still in my briefings or my speeches, where there's a picture of the Taliban, like all Taliban leaders, some of whom are still alive, and some of whom's sons are Taliban leaders today, sitting in the Oval Office, right? These bearded Talibani guys, or what became the Taliban, sitting with Reagan. And then I found an article from the Independent, right, a fairly liberal British newspaper that just is like a biopic of Osama bin Laden. It's from the 80s, and it's super positive. That's just one extreme example. I have dozens more of the direct blowback that we sometimes see. The stats that matter, though, are whether we're talking about corona, and I know you talk about this a lot, and it's not my area of expertise, but one thing some people have pointed out is that if we take sort of a sober look at the statistics, while tragic, maybe certain things aren't being given to us straight. And I'm much more comfortable in foreign policy because I have expertise there. But, there's about 26 to 30 foreign bases from all the other countries in the world, including Russia and China, meaning foreign overseas military bases. And we have about 800, about 100 of which are sizable, like really big. And look, the idea that China is coming for your kids or Russia is coming from your kids is belied not only by the fact that all of their internal, manifestations of policy and publications say that they're not trying to do that, but also their actions and their capabilities. Both of these countries have, certainly China has a rising economy, but from a geostrategic perspective, there are huge limitations to what they're capable of. So a lot of this is alarmism. That's my point.
We're speaking with Danny Sjursen. He is the author of skepticalvet.com. We'll continue to unpack the cost of war. Don't go anywhere. Stay with us.
A lawsuit is a devastating process for families. It can be an emotional roller coaster ride. There is a law firm in Tampa Bay that practices with this in mind. That law firm is Catania and Catania. We know and handle personal injury law for families with care. If it's an auto accident, medical malpractice, nursing home negligence, unsafe working conditions, or motorcycle accidents, the law firm of Catania and Catania will take care of the process worry-free from start to finish. Many victims don't even realize they can claim compensation for their loss until they talk to us. Catania and Catania only represent private individuals. We treat every case as if it's going to trial. Putting families first is more than just a slogan. It's our way of practicing law. It's our commitment to you. Remember, we don't get paid if you don't get paid. So go to CataniaCatania.com, award-winning, over 28 years, and family first. Catania Catania, personal injury, auto accident, and motorcycle accident attorneys.
JP here for Italiano Insurance. One of the great things about visiting Italiano Insurance and talking to the staff, I always learn things that I didn't know, like this one. Sudden accidental water damage is the #1 claim in Florida. Italiano had one claim last year worth $200,000 due to a pinhole in a water line in a dishwasher. It can happen to you. It's the #1 claim in Florida. Some policies exclude or limit the damage caused by these items. You got to have an informed agent that'll make sure that doesn't happen to you. Price is not the most important factor in choosing your insurance. You've got to make sure you get replacement value, not actual value, on your items. All these type of tidbits are things you're going to learn from the great folks at Italiano Insurance and can save you tens of thousands of dollars if something were to happen. So give them a call at 813-877-7799 or go to ItalianoInsurance.com. Doing business in your neighborhood for over 60 years. ItalianoInsurance.com. Entrepreneurs, business owners, listen up. Are you in need of a dynamic website that can grow your business? Do you need SEO marketing for Google to get at the top of those searches? Do you need help with taking advantage of social media? Well, call Chief Internet Marketer Jeff Stanislaw. Jeff is doing a great job on my website. He's redoing it, fanstreamsports.com. Take a look. I'd hired another company referred by a friend, this guy can do it for you. Well, the site wouldn't load, took forever to get it done. It was a nightmare. Now Jeff's taking the ball, shooting you straight and getting things done. So if you need any digital marketing or website services, I recommend Jeff. He is the Chief Internet Marketer. He can lead your business as well. Just give him a call at 888-340-INET, or if you like, email him at jeff@chiefinternetmarketer.com. Right now, to help businesses, he's waiving his fee. Free consultation. He'll look at your website, tell you what you need. That's Jeff Stanislaw, chiefinternetmarketer.com, or call 888-340-INET, or email him at jeff@chiefinternetmarketer.com.
Welcome back to A Neighbor's Choice. David Gornoski here, talking about Memorial Day and the cost of war with my guest, Danny Sjursen, who is the proprietor of skepticalvet.com, skepticalvet.com, where you can see his shows and his appearances at various different publications. And Dan, I know you're a military historian, and I know you did some comments on the War of 1812. Any thoughts on that war? That's a war that doesn't get a lot of attention in the history books.
Well, yeah, it's a long time ago. Most people don't know a thing about it. And Gordon Wood, famous historian, mentioned in the movie Good Will Hunting, famously, he said it was the strangest war in American history. And I think it really was the most peculiar. But it's not just a war that is interesting because of these funny facts or, obscurities. It actually has some relevance to today. The way that waging that war divided our nation, divided the two political parties. In fact, it destroyed one of them, the Federalists, which had a sort of reform as the Whigs later, and it divided our country regionally. The South and the West were really pro-war, and the Northeast was really against. Of course, that sounds familiar, right? And one of the most interesting things about it is that it accomplished nothing. It was waged on a series of lies, very similar to the Iraq War in a sense, although different lies. And in the end, the outcome was the status quo. Not a single thing was gained from the loss of all those lives, which, of course, historians have a consensus on. We've known this. And maybe it takes 200 years before we can, or 208 years before we can admit something like this. But, yeah, I see a lot of parallels, and I did a great podcast appearance on this, which you'll be able to find on my website. But it was Free Man Beyond the Wall was the podcast. And I do think that various wars in American history, even 200-year-old wars, have an extraordinary amount of relevance to today, and we ignore history at our peril. That's been proven over and over again, hasn't it?
Now, of course, the Mexican War, that was necessary, right?
The Mexican War is probably the most aggressive and ridiculous war in American history, which is saying a lot, okay? I have a series of volumes coming out, or parts of a series coming out with the Future of Freedom Foundation, the libertarian think tank, Jacob Hornberger, on the Mexican War. I write long pieces for them regularly, and those will be coming out very soon. The thing to understand about the Mexican War is it was in many ways a repeat of the War of 1812, except something really important happened, okay? It's a repeat in the sense that it was based on a lie that Americans had been killed by Mexicans on American soil, when, of course, the reality, as an obscure first-term congressman from Illinois, who no one's ever heard of, his name was Abraham Lincoln, he knew that, and he called the president out on the floor of Congress on his first floor speech, which he knew he was told by his advisors and friends that it was going to ensure he was not elected to a second term from his rather pro-war Western district. And, of course, he wasn't. He was a single-term congressman. The Mexican War had a huge, fallout, blow up at home politically. It was the first major widespread anti-war movement in American history developed in opposition to that war. We all know about Henry David Thoreau and civil disobedience, but the difference was that the Whigs, the successor party to those Federalists, and the Federalists fell apart after the War of 1812 because since they opposed the war, after Andrew Jackson won his great victory that actually meant nothing at New Orleans, the Federalists looked like traitors. They were painted as traitors, right, because they were against that war. And the Whig Party learned an important lesson. And the lesson they learned is it does not pay politically to be anti-war. And so when Polk sold them a bill of goods that a lot of them knew was a bill of goods about having to fight this war of conquest, they all rolled over, with the exception of like 13 immortals led by John Quincy Adams, a former president. And they voted for the war. Now, towards the end of the war, when it became more popular to be anti-war, some of them, but not all of them, did turn. And I would argue that this is not very different from today's Democratic Party that learned similar lessons in the blowback from their opposition to the Vietnam War, but even more so and forgotten, the first Persian Gulf War, which really ruined the prospects of a number of Democratic presidential hopefuls for the 1992 election, and part of the reason that an unknown like Bill Clinton kind of jumps in there and fills the slot. This is really important stuff. Wars come home politically and socially.
And there's an integral role that the media plays in stoking the fires for war in all of these conflicts. I'm thinking of the Spanish-American War and the USS Maine and all the different sensationalism. And look at Syria. The media still won't tell anything about OPCW whistleblowers exposing so much of that nonsense in Syria. They just, I mean, are they functionally basically a state organ at this point, Danny? It seems like it. It's like Pravda, but it's dressed as Mickey Mouse.
Well, yes, you mentioned the Spanish-American War and World War I in Syria. The Spanish-American War was the first media war. It was the first war that the media helped start. William Randolph Hearst was the Judith Miller, right, of his day. Judith Miller being the New York Times correspondent who sold us a whole bunch of lies. And the New York Times, the paper of record, right, acted as a state organ. Look, I think that what you have in American mainstream media is the illusion of diversity and the illusion of an oppositional media. But in reality, what they do is they create the contours, the very narrow and narrowing contours of polite debate that's allowed, that's permitted. And if you step outside of that and you ask questions like you mentioned about Syria and the white helmets and Russia's role or lack thereof and what we're trying to achieve, and is there such a thing as moderate rebels, right? All these things. If you question that, then you're lumped in with, like, Alex Jones or something, right? You're a nut, you're a conspiracy theorist, because the mistake you've just made is you've stepped outside the bounds of polite, permitted debate and the illusion, right, of oppositional media that the current press provides you. And I mean, that's why I think in some sense you do what you do and I do what I do, and neither of us is going to be on MSNBC or Fox tonight, right?
Well, I think in 2030 or 40, maybe they won't have as much influence as they have now. So let's just keep building the new media landscape. How about that?
I'm with you. I think that they are losing ground, and what we're doing is having an effect. And sometimes you got to play the long game, and I hope we are. And I'm just glad to do shows like this, man.
Hey, well, thanks for coming on. I appreciate you spending this holiday with us and getting the good word out. Truth is very important, and it's much appreciated for you to join us. SkepticalVet.com is Dan's website. Check out SkepticalVet.com. Thanks again, Dan.
Glad to do it. Thank you very much.
A Neighbor's Choice will continue in just a moment. Remember, Memorial Day is a time of reflection on the cost of war. Let's not cheapen it by ignoring its real cost. Let's do our job and love our neighbors as ourselves, including those that we would ask to go into combat. Let's not take that cheaply. Let's take that sacred. Life is precious. Godspeed.
Your home for news, talk, and